Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry McVenis, the President and CEO of RTCA. Greetings from our nation's capital and welcome to all of you to our sixth in a series of webinars, Aviation Technology Connect. And a special week this week, happy National Drone Safety Awareness Week. Traditionally, RTCA has always produced an annual Global Aviation Symposium during the month of June. However, given the situation that we're in these days, we've created this alternative means via this platform to hear from a variety of aviation industry leaders on a broad spectrum of topics that will educate you, further inspire you in your profession, and perhaps even evolve your thinking as to where the industry is today and where it's going in the future. We've had a very successful start to this series, exceeding all of our expectations here at RTCA. Our first 5 webinars have attracted an international audience of upwards of 400 people tuning in each month, not only from here in the United States, but also from Canada, countries across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, South America, Australia, and New Zealand. And today is no different. As I've looked at the attendee list, we are represented throughout the world today as well. During these webinars, we've heard from leaders from the FAA, from the NTSB, and from other industry leaders in our industry. So we believe that today's webinar is going to be equally exciting and informative. These previous webinars have all been recorded, as is this one. So if you want to go back and listen to any of our previous webinars, you can find those recording on the RTCA YouTube channel. We've been holding these webinars on the third Wednesday of each month, and like today, each of these webinars is going to focus on a particular topic where you're going to gain some insights from an aviation leader that I'm confident will be inspiring, strategic, or even thought-provoking, with the primary goal of giving you, the audience, the gift of their knowledge. Now, I'm most grateful to our sponsors from the industry that have come forward to make all of this happen throughout the year. Without their assistance, this webinar series would not be possible. And for today's event, I'm pleased to have Collins Aerospace, the National Business Aviation Association, and American Airlines as sponsors for today's webinar. On this platform, as part of our speaker presentation, you're going to be able to submit some questions, so it'll be very interactive. To do so, just click on the comment question mark icon, and we'll be sure to share those questions with our panelists. Also, there's some material that our sponsors have provided for you, and to access that material, simply click on the documents icon, and you'll be able to download them to your computer. So let's get started. I think most of our listeners know about IKO, but for those that don't, IKO is the International Civil Aviation Organization, and it's funded and directed by, last count I had, 193 national governments from around the world, and they're there to support diplomacy and cooperation in air transportation. Now, IKO is not a regulator, but rather they establish and maintain international standards and recommended practices, as well as procedures for air navigation. Their mission is to provide the fundamental basis for harmonized global aviation safety and efficiency in the air and on the ground, which included functional and performance requirements and an orderly development of air transport. The part of ICAO that manages all this work is the Air Navigation Bureau. And I'm pleased to have with us today Mr. Steve Creamer, the director of the Bureau. Steve and I go back a number of years. I think I first met Steve when he was in the FAA's regional office in Europe. He has since been in this IKO role since April of 2015, after having served 33 years at the FAA, where he held a number of executive and managerial positions there. He began his career in air traffic operations, and at one point was managing all of the Alaskan and North Pacific airspace, always with a keen eye for finding ways to improve capacity and efficiency, while also, of course, enhancing the overall safety of the system. Steve's no stranger to RTCA. He's previously spoken at our annual symposium, and as one of the members of ICAO Standards Roundtable, RTCA works closely with Steve and his staff in supporting his efforts in standards development. So Steve, stage is yours. I'll rejoin you a little bit later for some Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Terry. And I'm going to start the screen share, I hope, and then see if this doesn't come online. Nope, the wrong one. Now let me end that. Try again. That's the one we want. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to be here today, and I want to thank RTCA and their sponsors for the chance to share with you some dialogue around IKO and some of the issues that have come up because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and some work that we're doing to rethink our priorities as we come out of the backside of what will be a long and painful journey to get back to the aviation growth which we were enjoying earlier this year. Terry has actually done a little bit of my work for me, and that is to essentially do a little intro on IKO, because I think that it is important to put IKO's role in perspective. Talk a little bit about why it was established to help create aviation safety in a new international business, which emerged out of the back of World War II. We were established in 1944, as you'll recall. The war was not even over when the states that got together established the convention. And since that time, we have grown to actually 193 states. This slide is a little bit outdated. There are now over 12,000 standards and recommended practices, which have been established by the ICAO Council on behalf of the member states, which provide the framework under which all of the states in the world actually create their own standards. And those standards essentially are written into the law or regulation in each of the member states, and then the industry then complies with those national standards to be able to operate in an international world. And that relationship between the ICAO standards and the national standards and regulations is a key component of how we have evolved the system over the past 75 years. Now, as we've done that, we've also come to recognize that aviation is a key component in a global economy. And that can be good, and that can also be incredibly destructive, as we saw with the spread of the pandemic this year. But the intertwining of aviation activity with the rest of economic activity is vital to our future growth and sustainability of the economies and the societies around the world. ICAO doesn't just look at the most advanced parts of the world. In fact, I would say the large part of ICAO's role is helping states that have the least economic capability to be able to keep up or be part of this global aviation development community. And so a lot of the work that's done in the pioneering states, it's ICAO's role to assist in taking that work and making it available to other states. First, through the publication of the standards, the guidance material that goes with it, and then, of course, doing assistance work with those states to help them incorporate it into their own national law and into their own industry. And speaking of industry, ICAO's role with industry is to foster cooperation among the world's governments to support a global industry. And we have a traditional view of what that looks like, with the big manufacturing states for aircraft and the states that produce air traffic control equipment, communications equipment, etc. We're seeing a shift now with new entrants who have a different view of their relationship with national governments and how their products and their offerings can be interacting with those various new economies. At ICAO, you'll see that our the vision for the way forward is broken into 5 strategic objectives. With the Air Navigation Bureau, of course, we're looking at a couple of those objectives, principally safety and the development of air navigation capacity and efficiency in airspace as being primary to our role. Before I go forward now, I want to talk a little bit about how ICAO has faced the pandemic and COVID-19, and a little bit of why we think ICAO was an important place to do a lot of that work, and then have a few thoughts about how we see the intersection between that work and our regulatory activity and the state of the industry. Many of you have seen these charts, and they are available on the IKO website. I want to recommend to you the IKO.int/COVID website for a wealth of information that relates to the pandemic. But we are estimating in our Economic Bureau that between 59 and 60% decline in passenger numbers overall for 2020. Additionally, we're looking at a recovery that is not like the recoveries we've seen in past crises. This recovery is going to be long and painful because we have A, the severity of the economic impact on the various components of the industry, and B, the double task of regaining passenger confidence, not only in their health as they travel, but in their freedom to travel and move effectively from state to state under the auspices of the public health regulations that have been promulgated around the world in response to the pandemic. The varying forms of pandemic lockdown or restriction or testing criteria have really made it difficult for someone to plan an international trip. And we are very concerned about the ongoing evolution of these capabilities. And so IKO has spent a lot of time working on that. Before I go to the recovery part of that, though, I want to just point to the IKO website. This is the website that contains a lot of the links to our guidance that has been issued in the past. A lot of that guidance relating to how we could alleviate the impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns on safety protocols. How does a pilot get training on time? Can we extend the validity of licenses? How long would that be accepted in another country if we did that? So the guidance was all laid out for states, and they have implemented it pretty uniformly around the world. And we run a website that allows states to see how some of those alleviations have been taken into account. The other key component of what we've been doing is working with public health authorities around the world in our cooperative arrangement for public safety and health, the CAPSCA program. CAPSCA is actually a voluntary construct that was formed during the pandemics in the late 2009-2010 timeframe, and it gained a lot of operational capability during the Ebola outbreaks in 2014-15. During this pandemic, we've leveraged the CAPSCA partnerships between ICAO, the World Health Organization, the airline industry, and public health authorities around the world so that we could try and create some sort of a common set of expectations for the testing that would be required, for the protocols for public health screening, for disinfection and protection of passengers and air crew, and then trying to find ways where we could have a common understanding of how to restart. We started that with last spring with the public health corridor concept, the idea that initially we were trying to keep cargo operations alive so that cargo crew members could travel literally from one country to another and to a third without inadvertently being put in a lockdown circumstance because a state had imposed a mandatory quarantine, sometimes in an arbitrary way. And the public health authorities actually had primacy over the aviation authorities in making those decisions in those countries. So it created a lot of disruption for air cargo operations. That has since had a big impact on passenger operations. And so the CAPSCA collaborative work has continued to inform the work that is now being done at a higher level between the governments and the Council's Aviation Recovery Task Force. The second iteration of the task force's work has just concluded last week and has been published now in a document which also includes a recovery, what we call a takeoff document, which has all of the guidance material that we're encouraging states to implement, again, within their own public health and aviation regulations. So that's a little bit of a very quick overview of what we've been doing with the COVID-19 and the pandemic response at ICAO. And as we look forward, one of the concerns that we have that is actually outside of the purview of IKO's role is the economic impact of the pandemic. As we look forward, we're seeing a continued cash burn for all of the airline operators, literally all of the airline operators in the world, at a rate that will cause a substantial surge of bankruptcies and loss of business capability among many of the members of the airline community. That's having a knock-on effect on everyone else in the industry. Airports, air navigation service providers, MROs, even aircraft manufacturers. And all of them are now having substantial impacts in layoff of staff, reductions or curtailment of operations. And that's having us take a pause and think first from the ICAO perspective, what will be the impact on global safety? We're not too worried right now on operational capacity and efficiency because over 10,000 airframes are parked at airports around the world, waiting for the pandemic's effects to be remediated so that they can be returned into the operational aircraft fleet. And you can think about those 10,000 airplanes and very quickly recognize that this is an undertaking of a massive scale that's going to take several years for us to recover from. So that's a quick summary on what we're worried about with COVID. And as we go forward and look at recalibrating our priorities moving forward, this stays in the back of our mind. So for the rest of this presentation, be thinking about what are the economic impact of a cash loss business over the next 1, 2, even potentially 3 years for many of the world's operators as we try and go through a recovery. Now, I'm going to shift gears and take you into the part of this that really relates to our role, and that is these future activities. And we're going to continue and talk about how we're integrating innovative players in the system, and then what we think the next steps really are. And I'm going to go pretty fast, and I apologize for that, but that's something we have to do to keep things in the time frame that we're in. Very quickly, I want to just summarize the landscape at ICAO. There are 19 annexes in the Chicago Convention, and I love these 3 slides, which you'll have access to later, which summarize how the different annexes come together. Each of these annexes is managed by its own panel or expert group contributing to the development of the annex material and also the guidance material that goes with it. And the bottom line is all of this work comes together to do what the bottom of this slide says, allowing the international aviation system to have an absolutely enviable safety record. Safest form of transportation in the world, with the exception perhaps of the escalator. So it's really a credit to the professionals who have been part of developing this system. At ICAO, that work is done by 17 panels and several specific working groups who are made up of people like you, people who are nominated by their state or their industry sponsor, who become part of a panel and they work on developing this new material, which is then proposed for adoption worldwide. The trouble with this is this process takes between 5 and 7 years from the time a good idea is had until it actually becomes a standard that's ready for implementation around the world. I had my own personal experience with implementation of a very simple standard, which I use a lot when I'm talking to people about how complex this process is. And that is the reduced vertical separation minima standard. The change in accuracy that came with an air data computer that would allow 1,000 foot separation above 29,000 feet instead of 2,000 feet. Seems like a pretty straightforward change. That change caused so many operational, procedural, and regulatory changes that it took over 20 years to develop the first rollout in an airspace. And from the time of that first rollout in the North Atlantic in 1997, it took another 15 years to complete the rollout around the world, completing in Russia in 2012. That was a simple change in the accuracy of an air data computer. So you can imagine what it's going to take to change for artificial intelligence or a connected system Datacom has been in use in major air transport aircraft since 1994, but it is still not widely used in continental airspace for widespread air traffic control, and certainly not in a way that connects to the automation on the flight deck and in the air traffic control center in a meaningful way. So we have a long way to go there, and that work is what we're going to be talking about here, because even with the pandemic, it's still vitally important to the continued growth and sustainability of our industry. So I've used these slides before. They won't be unfamiliar to many people, but my belief and the belief of the staff in the Air Navigation Bureau is innovation starts at ground zero. It starts on the flight deck, it starts in the air traffic control room, it starts in the engineering bay. These are the people that actually know how the system works, and they have ideas every day on how the system can be made better. Part of IKO's role is making the process of proposing and moving those changes accessible for those people through their unions, through their management, through the industry innovator that they work for. Working in the Global Air Navigation Plan, we have the aviation system block upgrades, and our belief is that the block upgrades are the avenue by which all of these changes should be vetted for global consideration. And the sooner we can inoculate or develop these global considerations into a nation's regulatory thinking or its industry's thinking, the more quickly we can develop global standards that are actually ready for uptake. So I'll talk a little more about what we mean by this, but essentially this is turning on its head a little bit the tried and true method of development and implementation that we've done in the past. We're actually wanting to stop and say, what works for the controller, the pilot, the technician? And if it works for them, and a regulator can approve the airworthiness, the flight operations, and the air traffic control methodology, then you can look at the cost benefit and the operational feasibility. Until you do the human factors work on the front end, it's generally just a concept or a vision, and it doesn't get much further than that. So how do we evolve these standards moving forward? We believe that they have to be developed more within the states, working with their industry, and we're seeing this a lot with UAS, and I'll talk about that as we move forward. But we're also looking at big things, wake turbulence separation, time-based separation, being developed in Europe, and it was implemented at London Heathrow. We think there's a way to take all of that work that was done at London, for instance, and make it available for global adoption, even though it was done right there in country with their own industry experts. And there's not a single thing about it today in the procedures for air navigation, ATM, coming from IKO. And we want to take that material and make it available based upon the regulatory approval process that was accomplished by the UK CAA, working with the controllers, pilots, and with the airport and ANSP authorities. What makes that possible? Annex 19. Our belief is that safety management systems and safety risk assessment is absolutely the core of any of these changes. It still remains the #1 priority that we have something vetted for the purpose of our working well in a way that everyone can understand. So those are really interesting words, but how does this take effect in priority? Now, I'll press this and there's going to be a video, and when it does, this video has some of the SpaceX footage from the Falcon 9 Heavy launch and recovery that was done a couple of years ago in Florida. And the fascinating thing about this, and what I use it for to talk to people, is to recognize that autonomous flight with really, really impressive energy and mechanical challenges is already being done in the aerospace world. And that was one view, this is the view that excites the public. Two boosters coming down out of the sky, supersonic, less than a minute before they land on the ground, and doing it essentially without human intervention, totally computer controlled. Now, what made that okay in the environment where that happened? Well, what made it okay was that they took an airspace, probably the size of, 20 miles around, and they said nobody gets in that airspace. They segregated it, was A. And B, they had safety protocols that they considered to be acceptable for the participants. And C, they had a regulator that had a set of rules that permitted that utilization of technology in those conditions that was different from the rest of their regulatory regime. And we're having to take the same look at other parts of the industry. Talking about drones, we're talking about other kinds of interactions, and they have to be addressed differently. So the next type of operator, drones. We want to bring RPAS, the remote piloted aircraft system, was what IKO worked on for almost the last 15 years, to bring an IFR capable unmanned aircraft into the airspace alongside of airliners. But who would have thought that in the middle of that march, we would be inundated with hundreds of thousands of unmanned aircraft systems being flown principally by hobbyists, but more and more by professionals, with more and greater capabilities being introduced into the airspace every day. They need to safely coexist. Our operating paradigm in the original use of these systems was, let's just make sure that they don't get in anyone's way, and see and avoid. They have to be capable of see and avoid before we let them interoperate. Well, see and avoid with a drone that is this big is impractical. But detect and avoid is certainly practical and requires a new way of thinking. And it's something that has to be introduced into the airspace and done in a way that's repeatable between the United States, Europe, China, and other parts of the world where they're actually using the drones in real day-to-day operations. I was in Rwanda on my last mission before the pandemic to observe the use of drones operated by the Zipline Corporation on behalf of the Rwandan government to deliver blood and medical supplies all over the country in regular operations with over 100 drone flights a day, some of which flew as far as 80 miles from the station that I was looking at. And they were flying on predetermined automated routes, which could be altered by the operator in the event that there was an operational necessity to do it. They had gone through the risk assessment process for every aspect of their operation, including avoiding the operations of manned aircraft and integrating their work into the air traffic control system there. Now, they didn't have all of the complexity of a general aviation industry with many, many operators, but they had to think about it, and they had to put those capabilities into place in a way that was suitable for their own environment. And I think that we all have those interests as we're looking at moving forward. But the lessons that can be learned in developing parts of the world where they can gain the real benefit from these operations can frequently be gained there. And then we have to find a way, working through ICAO, to bring that home and integrate it into regulation, sometimes in the states where the corporations are actually headquartered, sometimes in other parts of the world that have the same interest or same capability that they'd like to move forward. And of course, the holy grail with drones is with automated flight, putting that paying passenger in the operation and letting them go from point A to point B very rapidly. And so the urban air taxi, air transport concept is alive and well, and actually is protected to some degree from the pandemic, because the people who are investing in that venture capital style development are people who are frankly making money in this environment. So we have to think about how we're going to support the airworthiness development work that has to happen there, again, using the safety risk profiles that are perhaps different from what we had thought they would be in other environments. Now, I want to play another video if I can. I'm going to see if this is going to work. And this one is interesting because it takes a lot of these concepts and puts them into operations that we all know and love. And that is the use of essentially autonomous operations to fly an airplane with passengers on it and take it in the air traffic control system that we know today and fly it onto a runway in an emergency operation when the pilot is incapacitated. The FAA worked with the manufacturer for, as I understand it, almost 7 years to develop the approval for the use of this system. And of course, that use is predicated on the idea that this is an emergency and that you wouldn't be using the system in normal operations, but it beats the alternative, which would be the loss of the aircraft and the souls on board in the event of an incapacitated pilot in the most critical situations. So think about the regulatory and technical hurdles that the team had to go through to win that acceptance. And they worked on that probably nonstop with a team of folks in the regulator who had to become as expert on their system as they were in order to make the judgment that the government could make the approval. At the end of this process, where they have this approved, now I want to repeat it in 192 other states. And that's the challenge that I think that we're all facing as we move forward with a system of this complexity and this sophistication. So we have at IKO the Global Air Navigation Plan. So in the same period of time that it took Garmin and Piper and the FAA to develop this emergency auto land system, we publish a new version of the Global Air Navigation Plan every 6 years. We update it minimally in a 3-year increment, but it's really a 6-year march to the next refresh of the document. And this last refresh was significant because we went to an online platform with many parts of the GAMP in an online form that can be updated more rapidly. But rapid updates are not necessarily as important for a planning document like this as having the ability to move rapidly through what the process that the GAMP outlines is. And that's something that we have to work on. Presuming for a minute that you've done that and you've gotten yourself a very sophisticated airplane that is capable of updates, do you connect it to anything? And that's the next big challenge that we're working on at IKO, and that is technology and information fully connected anywhere so that we can have full situational awareness that's going to facilitate the work of the pilot, the air traffic controller, the operator of the system at large in a way that they've never been facilitated before. Remember, it's only 6 short years ago that we had a Boeing 777 disappear and had no way to intervene in that loss because of the probable unlawful interference on the aircraft. A lot of work has been done in the meantime to find ways to be able to do interventions or do sensing that can allow us to have awareness and operational capability in events of that nature in the future. All of it requires connectivity. And that connectivity today is unfortunately threatened by the fact that we have bad actors in the world who have an interest in disrupting or even threatening our systems. And so we're trying to develop a digital trust framework for aviation architecture that will help us to withstand and ferret out those kinds of attacks. Our vision is to have the civil aviation sector be resilient to cyber attack, remain safe and trusted globally, while continuing to innovate and grow. That architecture comes with processes and procedures to guarantee that stakeholders are providing or consuming data and information in an aviation ecosystem are identified and are the same stakeholders, and the messages they are exchanging are trusted. And that's a key component of our system, is trust. So, where are we now? I have my last video to play for you. Where are we now in aviation? Well, we're not where we would like to be necessarily, but we're not that far away, I don't think, if we continue on the path that we're on now. Now, this is a homegrown video, but I thought it was fun because I'm essentially showing you a video of automated driving in a car that's sensing all of the traffic around it. And as it's making its decisions, I'm going to ask the car to take and put me in the right-hand lane. Whoops, I got to turn that out of the way. And you'll see the line on the right go red, and that'll be because there's traffic in the way, and then it will clear, and the car will put itself in the lane adjacent to the right. And when it completes that, it turns the blinker off. Now, that was 2 years ago. That car today will navigate from point A to point V, putting itself in the correct lanes to take exits, go through the exits in the interchanges, resume its speed back on the next interstate, and will essentially do all of that navigation, getting into the passing lane, passing cars, putting itself back in the right-hand lane when it's finished a pass. And all of that capability was delivered over the air, utilizing the internet, heaven forbid. So that's where we are now. We have the capability to deliver fully capable renewal of systems in a way that we have never had before. And we need a way for that to be accepted by the regulators around the world who are making approvals, and for it to be legitimately safe. After the Air Navigation Conference in 2018, we began the work on developing a trust framework for aviation itself. We're working on identity management policies that will be promulgated around the world by regulators and will allow the development of technology and equipment in the airplane, in the air traffic control center, in sensing stations at airports all over the world. Network operations will be defined for performance requirements that will allow for dynamic and real-time monitoring and detection of cyber intrusion and cyber disruption so that those events can be recovered from. We'll never be in a position where we can prevent all of them. That's just not what happens. But we can be in a position to where we have resiliency and fallback capability moving forward. And we're working with some industry leaders in developing tests and frameworks that will allow us to test these capabilities. And of course, we're using the credibility of the regulator as the cornerstone of this architecture, because we believe the regulator already issues licenses and approvals all over the world, and the trust in those documents and approvals is what we can rely on as we promulgate a digital capability. And finally, this architecture works in collaboration with cybersecurity procedures and operational acumen. It does not replace them. They have to work side by side to deal with safety risks and cyber threats simultaneously in the same system. So we're working to again, establish the identity and trust. You'll find an interesting proposal going to be coming out of IKO here in the next few weeks for electronic pilot licenses that will allow for digital pilot licenses to be promulgated by states and accepted around the world. And this is a kind of a precursor to what we would expect for the airframe and the operation moving forward. So that's the trust framework. Now, I have a couple of slides that wrap this up and talk about the standards process in this new reality, this new environment. And that is essentially to say we have an integrated ComNav surveillance project that is underway because of the increasing pressure from outside of aviation to utilize spectrum in bands that are currently allocated for aviation. The systems that are used for ComNav and surveillance are very reliable, but they're old and they're not spectrum efficient. Today's technology is advancing very rapidly, principally due to innovations in the telecom industry. But our process can't keep up today. we have to reboot and find a new way of taking advantage of what is coming in that industry and giving them performance requirements that they can essentially develop to meet and prove for us in a way that's different from what we've done in the past. So we've started this task force to look at how to do this. And we're essentially saying, why is this still critical when we've melted down the industry with a pandemic? The pressure from the telecom industry will not stop because aviation is suffering. We're revisiting the CNS standards and specifications frameworks to reduce future risks and prepare for future growth, which will occur again. We do have that positive bent in our mind. And we want to evolve the systems to ensure continued safe performance of these systems, considering the constraints in frequency spectrum. And we actually think that the pause in growth is providing us an opportunity to get in front of the requirements that we have coming forward. We have a roadmap that provides a common vision for CNS and spectrum evolution in the medium and long term, which will be reflected in the IKO proposed position for the next World Radio Conference. And we'll have a new voluntary technical specification framework, which facilitates the development of advanced technology standards in a timely manner. It should support speedier implementation of new technologies across multiple airspaces. Early adoption by industry or stakeholders will maximize the operational benefit and ultimately minimize the investment risk. And this will also help to filter out failure cases before we embark on standardizing these at ICAO. But again, that requires a lot of upfront work in the leading regulatory environments around the world, FAA, Europe and EASA, China, Singapore, other key players who are in the forefront of developing capabilities. We intend that this would deliver benefit to all states because it facilitates the introduction of these technologies in essentially a way that is standardized so that if the industry innovates once, it doesn't have to innovate for different regulatory regimes that are not consistent with one another, especially as we start to integrate operating concepts with the technology. If go back to the video on the emergency auto land, the number of decisions and assumptions on how that had to work, that had to be satisfied for one regulator, will frequently require a different set of decisions with another regulator unless we have common understanding of what's required. And finally, the last slide I'll put up here is essentially a vision of how these standard frameworks will help us with more rapid system development and introduction. We think this accommodates more stakeholders. Remember, we're not just talking about big iron. We're talking about UAS. We're talking about automated ATM systems. We're talking about sensing systems that can take the entire environment and allow much more interactive use of the intelligence that's on each of the vehicles and ATM systems in a way that we haven't been able to exercise in the past, and use less spectrum in the process. And I'll put in a plug for the IKO Innovation Fair that's coming forward here in December the 7th to 11th. It's a virtual event. You can look for it on the IKO.int website. And it's a place to continue this discussion. And I want to stop now, very much overtime, I'm sure, Terry, and ask you to come back on and thank everybody for your attention so far. I hope we have some questions. Thanks.
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Steve. A great presentation. A lot of great things to think about in there, that's for sure. We've got a couple of questions. I'm going to start off with one of my own, because it's maybe more in an organizational standpoint. ICAO has a number of regional offices around the world, and how does the priorities and the work that's going on in Montreal, how do you interact with those regional offices from a standards development sort of perspective?
So the standards development itself is done on a technical aspect in the panels. It doesn't happen in the regional offices.
Yeah.
But the needs that are identified that need to be solved for those interactions with technology do really come from the regions. I used to be a member of a PERG, essentially, a couple of PERGs, in fact. And many of the innovations that came out of the original fans came from the Pacific region, trying to find ways to innovate for long distance, really extreme flying, 15-hour flying. And the innovations all came because they had requirements that ultimately fed into the standards making process for technical specifications. I think that what we're trying to propose now is that we think that we can deliver the toolkit for how to do this kind of development in region. And more this will require regional stewardship by the regional offices. But frankly, that's not their mandate today. And it would require that the expertise be contained within the membership that comes from the various states in a region. I would expect to see, honestly, that the APAN-PIRG, the Asia Pacific Region Safety Group, would be two places where I would see regional development occurring sooner rather than later, similar to what we've seen in the past from NATSPIG for a long time, and now the European Aviation Safety Group, because those are places where you have the capability in the member states.
You mentioned the trust network, the trust framework that you're working on. Good question from one former colleague of mine. What does the blockchain technology have a role in that trust net framework that you're doing?
Tell me again, which technology?
Blockchain technology?
Or perhaps. We actually think, I mean, it would be a sub-layer of the technology that would be moving forward. There is a place for blockchain in particularly certificate promulgation, but in terms of how the system is operated, we're using a combination of the best practices that the Internet Engineering Task Force and the Internet, the ICANN have put forward for governance on the Internet, operations of the Internet, and blockchain might well be a component of that, but it's only one component.
I saw a lot of, that work that was done with Piper and Garmin and the FAA in developing that autonomous operation. And you made the comment that that was for one member state. And how do you duplicate that over 193 total across the world? What's the secret sauce there? What do you think it really would take to do that, to make it a lot easier so it can be replicated?
Well, it will never be easy. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I think there has to be more focus on the operating procedure. The end product, whatever it is, has to be adaptable into an airspace where everyone is trained on what to expect, on how to interact with it. I'm sure that the Garmin system, and I'm personally not an expert on it, I'm sure the Garmin system has required a training module for air traffic controllers all over the United States to understand what to do if this thing calls them. And they probably have to get the binder out and start looking at how to react to it and get everybody out of its way. So it's but that's something that was worked. It was eventually accepted and agreed upon before it would be approved on the other end. I think that's the kind of interaction that has to happen. RVSM, a lot of people talked about RVSM for years as being something that was really effective in the United States. Well, it wasn't effective because it was rocket science. It was effective because we had pilots and air traffic controllers involved in the development of the capabilities all along. And then in the end, flight inspectors, because they had to inspect the airplane, they had to approve the ops, they had to have air traffic controls procedures approved by inspectors. All of those people had to be involved in how the technology was going to be accepted, what the caveats were, what the non-standard ops were. And that's really been the challenge. Not a few years ago now, 15 years ago, UPS worked on ADS-B in-trail spacing. They had 12 airplanes equipped for it. They did a lot of tests in Louisville, and it had a lot of promise. Never went anywhere though, because you couldn't take it anywhere but Louisville. That's the challenge that, they had these airplanes, but they couldn't go to Cologne and get the same service. They couldn't even go to any other hub and get that service. So scaling that technology did not make sense to UPS. And I think that's the kind of thinking that we have to have, is how to put all those components in an operational package. And if it gets done in one region, like the Garmin product has been done, then I think that is transportable and other regions will accept based upon the demonstrated work, the demonstrated safety cases, regulatory approaches that are put in place by the key players who are introducing the capability in one region or another.
Yeah, and so important for these new entrants and these new ideas to be teaming with the regulator early on in the process too, I think. So they kind of work the issue together, and then since we're talking standards, and you do standards, we do standards, on making sure those standards are in place, it could help help with that innovation going forward too.
Yeah, and the vast majority of that work now happens outside of ICAO. I have no question that, and it's in the last few slides that Lofter and his team produced. We don't expect to do technical specification style work at ICAO anymore. The specifications style standards that are in Annex 10, they will time out. And we don't expect to insert the new stuff there. We expect to reference RTCA's materials, reference other standards making bodies materials, because that's how we can iterate more quickly. I've never seen anybody build a box out of an ICAO manual.
That's true. Hey, a couple of things on environmentally. You didn't touch too much on that, but certainly I know one of the strategic goals for ICAO is the environment, whether it's noise, fuels, emissions, and so on. How is COVID-19 impacting that effort at ICAO right
now? Clearly where investments are being decided, that's probably making an impact in the boardrooms. But you might be surprised to find that in many parts of the world, it's still a high priority. We just had a council meeting this morning where the next steps in the implementation of the CORSIA capabilities was decided, and states are continuing with the development of their action plans. Investments in more efficient engine technology and alternative fuels continues unabated. So I think that remains a high priority. Certainly in civil society in Europe, it is one of the key existential issues that they deal with. Probably you could look at it and find it just below the pandemic in their view of what needs to be addressed by society. So it's very much still a high priority
item. And kind of related to environmental issues internally to an airplane. There's been a lot of talk over the years about quality of air filtration systems on board an airplane, contaminated air, and so on. Is there been any work at ICAO on addressing some of those air filtration things?
Not specifically at ICAO in terms of the environmental program that we have. That would be on probably more occupational safety and health. Although there was some work done in the CAPSCA program during the pandemic to look at filtration capabilities on airplanes. And as you've probably seen in the media and the releases that have come out, we found that actually systems do a pretty good job of filtering, and we're not seeing spread of the infection on board in a way that's really got any significance at all. It's actually almost unmeasurable in the number of people flying. So I think that actually bodes well for the state of the technology, particularly on the newer aircraft. And we're not seeing a move for greater international standards making, at least that the states are calling for.
One issue I think that a lot of people, especially younger people today, are worried about, and that's, am I going to have a career in aviation going forward, given all the layoffs that have been taking place in the airlines, early retirements? Any thoughts on workforce issues, maintaining quality technicians and so on?
I remain positive simply because we've seen the exponential growth recover multiple times before. Having said that, though, it will be a very challenging time in the next couple of years, I think. One of the advantages that people in aviation have, though, is the applicability of their knowledge, skills, and ability within sometimes other parts of the industry. So it is possible in many cases to take a sidestep and go through another part of the industry for a while for your living or developing your expertise or competence, and then being able to rejoin your chosen expertise or job when the economic conditions become more favorable. The value of understanding the regulatory framework cannot be understated because it is, or cannot be overstated, because I don't know how many times I've spoken to an emerging technology provider who did not understand the system, who was happy to pay for that expertise, to get the experts on board to help them with their development. And if you want to talk about the number of airframes that are going to come in the system in the next 10 years, what are those airframes going to be, right? They're going to be small operations. And so how that works is the Wild West. And I think there's an opportunity for people to grab onto that. And then I actually think that traditional aviation is going to learn the vast majority of its lessons from the work that's happening in these emerging markets, because the emerging markets are where innovation risk is more tolerated, both by the financial investor and also by the society that's operating with those capabilities, because they're seeing the benefit of taking those risks, so to speak. The aviation regulator is much more terrified of a drone than the public is. It's actually fascinating to me. I don't know how many times I've flown a small drone and had people take their 2-year-old up and want to stick its finger in the propeller, right? So they don't, it's just a very different social perception of what risk is. So I think there's a lot of market for our skills and capabilities as we re-engineer how the airspace is utilized and how the public is served by aviation of all forms.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of seen an evolution just in the last, 5 to 10 years, where the new entrants are kind of trying to operate in a silo from the traditional operators. But I'm seeing it merging together now. I'm seeing some of the new entrants hiring people, like retired people from the FAA or current people from the FAA, people from the traditional OEMs coming in to help them. And I think there's a lot of cross learning going on that's being very, very helpful to the industry, to both sides of the industry, as you point out.
Yep.
One question we have here is, you mentioned the artificial intelligence, and the question is, how far are you away from issuing a SARP in regard to artificial intelligence, especially as it applies to autonomous flight?
We're not. I don't see IKO anywhere near that point. I think we would want to see leading work by some of the key states that are in that industry before the IKO would take that kind of an action. It's not unlike where we are with spaceflight. Spaceflight is something where we have a learning group that monitors what's being done, but we aren't in a position where we would want to promulgate any kind of standards or regulation until we see some consensus developing on what's required.
And it was kind of related to the spectrum issue that you talked about. Certainly, the allocation of frequencies, the interference issues that we're all familiar with as they apply to radar altimeters, GPS signals. Is there anything? I mean, you mentioned that was it ICMSS? Can you tell just a little bit more about that? How they're looking at dealing with some of this from an international standpoint?
So our vision is one where we have some global capacity that's provided generally by the industry that is taken advantage of by the operator community, the vehicle community, in a way that is consistent and that can be regulated consistently. So we're seeing it today, for instance, with Ariane and ADS-B. We've got a global ATM picture that's emerging that various regulators, various ANSPs are giving credit for and enabling. We're going to see the same thing with a global comm capability, I think, very shortly. And certainly the world's global or mobile telephone provider networks are very keenly want into that business. And where they are seeking to get into that business initially is beyond line of sight, because they think they're a provider of choice for that purpose, and they really want to engage with the aviation community and be part of that. So I think that there's, and then the last is navigation, and we're working to, that's a little harder to promulgate from the industry, but the government-sponsored global navigation satellite systems, we're working on making sure they continue to be interoperable and to expand their capabilities for reception by dual constellation and having redundancy between the constellations in a way that gives higher levels of availability and integrity to the product that's coming from those networks for the aviation user.
Well, great. Hey, I think we got through most of the questions. We'll review the ones we have, and if there's any we missed, we'll follow up with you and get an answer to the questions and get it to the person that asked. But again, I want to thank you, Steve, for just a great presentation. I knew it would be a good one, and you didn't disappoint as usual. So thank you very much, and look forward to our continued relationship working together.
Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for your attention.
One of the sponsors for today's webinar is Collins Aerospace, and they've got a video that they want to share with you. So let's go ahead and roll that video.
From the smallest details to the highest pursuits, we are redefining aerospace. With our customers, we relentlessly tackle the toughest challenges in our industry. And every day, we imagine ways to make the skies and the spaces we touch smarter, safer, and more amazing than ever. Together, we chart new journeys and reunite families. We protect nations and save lives. And we explore the unknown. We believe in the power of intelligence and partnership to guide our customers into the future, reshaping our industry across the globe and even beyond. The paths we pave together lead to limitless possibility, and the bonds we form propel us all higher, again and again. We are constant in our evolution. We are connected to our customers, always. We are compelling as we boldly step forward. We are redefining aerospace.
Thanks again to Collins Aerospace for that video. It's always very inspiring to watch. I also want to take a moment and thank all of our sponsors for today's event. Even during these difficult times, these organizations have been gracious enough to step forward and make this series of webinars happen. As I mentioned earlier, several of our sponsors have some materials, handouts for you. Simply click on that handouts icon and you'll be able to download those to your computer. So again, my thanks to Collins Aerospace, NBAA, and American Airlines for sponsors of today's webinar. Your continued support to RTCA and the industry is very much appreciated. Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, this is National Drone Safety Awareness Week. And this is an educational campaign that's been coordinated by the FAA and the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team. So it's only fitting to have Mr. Jay Merkel, the Executive Director of the FAA's Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office, with us today. Jay is responsible for facilitation of the FAA's safe integration of drones into the National Airspace System. So Jay, thank you for joining us for your short Tech Talk today.
Thank you, Terry, for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here at the RTCA Tech Talk. I hope everyone's been staying safe and healthy during this extraordinary time. We've been very busy when it comes to rulemaking, and making plans for the post-integration pilot program. Without further ado, here we go. I want to start with an update on rulemaking. The FAA has submitted final rules on remote identification and night and operations over people, which will greatly advance the utility of this fast evolving transportation technology. With these rules, our regulatory work on visual line of sight is nearing an end. These rules will help enable more complex UAS operations and continued safe operation of aircraft in our shared airspace. This progress will move us towards beyond visual line of sight operations and take us beyond our Part 107 visual line of sight rule. Both rules are expected to be issued by the end of 2020. The low-hanging fruit is gone. Enabling scalable, economically viable, beyond visual line of operations is the FAA's biggest UAS integration challenge. In many ways, this will be a heavier lift than remote identification. BVLOS operations introduce new allocations on how to manage the aircraft, the operation, and the airspace safely, all of which will continue to drive a holistic safety management approach. Routine and scalable BVLOS operations will require airworthy aircraft, that is, type certified aircraft, operating under parts 191, 135, or other regulations. It's been a big focus in 2020 as we transition operators out of Part 107 and into Part 91, our general aviation rule. We realize that the BVLOS challenge is substantial. It's the hardest part of realizing full UAS integration, but it will also provide the biggest payoff. However, regulations alone will not unlock the true economic and societal benefits of BVLOS operations. We are enabling drone operations under our existing regulatory structure. In 2020, we certified Amazon Prime Air as the third Part 135 carrier of small packages of commercial goods. In 2019, we had certified the first two Part 135 operators with UPS Flight Forward and Wing Aviation LLC. Air carriers such as these are at the forefront of testing drone delivery. That's why initiatives like the UAS Integration Pilot Program, or IPP, are so critical. This public-private partnership was focused on broader UAS integration efforts and enabled operations in multiple scenarios and environments. Here are some of the IPP's accomplishments. Over 2,000 retail package deliveries, over 1,500 medical deliveries serving over 6,000 patients with 6,800 flight hours or 19,000 flights. But the IPP's ultimate accomplishment is that it better defines some of our challenges moving forward, including routine, scalable BVLOS operations. Now that the IPP is ended, we're taking advantage of these lessons learned and moving to the Beyond program. What was gained in the IPP is informing Beyond, which will push us even further or beyond what the IPP participants achieved. The Beyond effort is designed to further investigate and resolve the challenge of UAS BVLOS flight in three particular environments: rural, suburban, and urban, using three different concepts of operation: infrastructure inspection, public operations, and small package delivery. To date, 8 IPP lead participants have joined the Beyond program. The guiding principles for Beyond are to focus on addressing the challenges of integrating BVLOS operations into the NAS, improving our internal processes to ensure consistency and repeatability of UAS operational approvals, and to develop a strategy to transition UAS operations to rule and inform specific rule areas, enable UAS commercial industry to leverage operations to better document the societal and economic benefits of UAS technology, and provide an opportunity to address state and local government concerns regarding UAS integration. Meanwhile, the FAA will look to develop performance-based standards and to define and develop a transition plan for UAS to operate by rule. The first National Drone Safety Awareness Week was held November 4th through 10th, 2019. Due to the ongoing concerns about COVID-19, the 2020 event is going on virtually this week. It started November 16th and runs through November 22nd. National Drone Safety Awareness Week is an annual week-long outreach campaign that aims to help educate the public about drone safety by highlighting how key sectors of the drone community are engaging with the public and spreading safety awareness across all 50 states. The FAA will be partnering with the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team for this year's event, and we are encouraging even more participation from industry as we look for newer avenues to engage and educate would-be and current UAS operators. This outreach campaign is crucial to ensuring that the safety message gets out to recreational and commercial drone operators alike. Safety awareness and practice has to keep pace with the drone innovation and use. This year, there are virtual events, webinars, art exhibits, and more. We're also providing some fun downloadable resources. You can find these on our FAA website. And our FAA Office of Communications is promoting National Drone Safety Awareness Week on social media and helping to tell a lot of drone for good stories. When it comes to Drone Safety Awareness Week, there's no such thing as too much press. If you're interested in learning more, please visit the DroneSafetyAwarenessWeek.com website. We hope to see you online at one of the events this week. Thank you again for having me here today. As always, thank you for being a part of the drone community conversation.
Well, thank you, Jay. And I would echo that. Go to the website he mentioned. It's got some great material on the website, some great stories, and I think you'll really enjoy some of the information that's contained there. Well, this concludes our webinar for today. Again, my sincere appreciation to Steve Creamer and to Jay Merkel again for your valuable participation this afternoon. Again, thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar, Collins Aerospace, National Business Aviation Association, and American Airlines. And remember to go to that handouts icon on this platform to get more information about our sponsors. And for the audience, thank you as well for joining us today. I hope you found today's presentations educational, inspiring, and evolving. And again, these webinars are being recorded, so if you want to review anything presented today or any of our past webinars, you can do so by going to the RTCA YouTube channel. I hope you're going to be able to join us for our next webinar. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. First of all, we're going to be moving up the webinar, the December webinar, to Monday, November 30th at 12 noon Eastern time. So it won't be in December, it'll be on the 30th of November. And we're going to focus our webinar on something that Steve brought up in his presentation, and that's spectrum issues. In particular, we're going to be looking at a recent report and white paper that RTCA produced about the potential interference to radar altimeters from those 5G telecommunication systems. Our research has showed that the deployment of 5G networks may introduce some harmful radio frequency interference to radar altimeters on all types of civil aircraft, including commercial air transport airplanes, business, regional, and general aviation airplanes, as well as both transport and general aviation helicopters. As many of you know, radar altimeters are deployed on tens of thousands of civil aircraft in the United States and around the world. and they support several critical safety of flight aircraft functions throughout multiple phases of flight. Radar altimeters are the only sensor aboard a civil aircraft that provides a direct measurement of the clearance height of the aircraft over the terrain and other obstacles. So please tune in again on Monday, November 30th at noon Eastern, when you'll hear from leaders from our Special Committee 239. They'll walk you through an overview of our white paper and have an interactive session with the audience to address your comments and concerns. So again, I hope you'll be able to join us. Thank you again for being with us today, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.